Mysticism in the 20th Century. Thomas Merton. 1. Biography. Thomas Merton was an important Trappist monk, mystic, writer, and social activist of the 20th century. He was born on January 31st, 1915 in Prades, France, and died on December 10th, 1968 in Bangkok, Thailand. His life and works have inspired many people, both spiritually and socially. Here are some aspects of Thomas Merton's life and his inspirational impact. Childhood and early life. Religious quest. Although Merton grew up in a non-religious environment, he was a spiritual seeker from childhood. After the death of his parents, he converted to the Catholic faith. Youth and education. Merton studied at Columbia University in New York and was shaped by various influences, including Buddhist writings. He developed an interest in literature, art, and philosophy. The path to the monastery. Vocation to monasticism. After an intense spiritual search, Merton entered the Trappist monastery Abbey of Gethsemani in Kentucky in 1941. This was the beginning of a deep spiritual journey. Contemplative life. At the monastery, Merton lived a contemplative life characterized by prayer, meditation, and work. He devoted himself to the search for God in silence and solitude. Writing activity, autobiographical works. Merton is known for his autobiographical works, including The 7-Story Mountain, German Der Bergruft, which describes his spiritual journey. The book became a bestseller and influenced many people who were searching for a deeper meaning in life. Theology and spirituality. Merton wrote numerous theological and spiritual works in which he addressed topics such as contemplation, interfaith dialogue, and social justice. His writings reflected his mystical experience and his confrontation with the challenges of the time. Interreligious dialogue. Exchange with Eastern religions. Merton was a pioneer in interfaith dialogue. He studied the scriptures of Eastern religions, especially Buddhism, and sought common spiritual foundations between the different faiths. Promotion of dialogue. Merton emphasized the importance of dialogue between religions to promote deeper understanding and respect for one another. His commitment to interfaith dialogue influenced many people and contributed to the development of a global spiritual perspective. Social activism, peace movement. Merton was actively involved in the peace movement and campaigned against the Vietnam War. He was a fierce critic of violence and social injustice. Social justice. Merton campaigned for social justice, race relations, and civil rights. His writings and activities inspired many people to work for a more just society. Inspirational impact, authenticity. Merton's authentic spiritual quest and openness to different faiths made him accessible and inspiring to many people. Combination of spirituality and activism. The combination of a deeply spiritual life with social activism made Merton an inspiring figure for people seeking a holistic spirituality that manifests itself in social action. Universality. Merton's efforts at interfaith dialogue and his emphasis on universal spirituality appealed to people seeking a transcendent understanding beyond denominational boundaries. Search for meaning. In a time of change and uncertainty, many people were searching for meaning and spiritual values. Merton's writings offered guidance and a profound perspective on the search for deeper meaning in life. Thomas Merton's life and legacy are reflected in his many writings. His contribution to spiritual literature and the promotion of peace, justice, and interfaith dialogue makes him a timeless source of inspiration for people in search of a deeper understanding of life and spirituality. Mysticism in the 20th century. Thomas Merton. 2. His mysticism. Thomas Merton's mystical insights are deeply rooted in his spiritual journey as a Trappist monk and mystic. Merton underwent a profound inner transformation that led to mystical experiences which he reflected on in his writings, especially in his diaries and theological works. Here are some aspects of his mystical insights: contemplation and interiority. Merton's mystical journey was characterized by contemplative practices. Contemplation is a form of prayer that focuses on listening to God and emphasizes silence and inwardness. Merton recognized the importance of inner silence as a space for the presence of God. In his search for mystical experience, Merton emphasized that true contemplation is not just an individual event, but a shared experience that includes all of humanity. The search for unity, a central theme in Merton's mystical insights, was the search for unity, both with God and with all of creation. He recognized the connection between all people, all religions and nature. Merton described the mystical experience of oneness with God as a state of union, in which the separation between the individual and God is abolished. He emphasized that this union is a deep spiritual experience that lies beyond intellectual conceptions. Inner knowledge and intuition. Merton recognized the limitations of intellectual knowledge and emphasized the importance of inner knowing and intuition. Mystical insights often arise beyond rational thought and are more of an immediate intuitive experience. He described inner knowing as a form of cognition that arises through the direct presence of God in the deepest self. This realization goes beyond rational reasoning and leads to a direct, immediate experience of truth. Ecstasy and love. Merton spoke about mystical ecstasy, a state of intense joy and love in the presence of God. This state is not only personal, but also has implications for the individual's relationship with all of creation. Love was a central theme in Merton's mystical insights. He emphasized that true mystical experience goes hand in hand with love, not only for God, but also for all creatures. Integration of contemplation and action. An important aspect of Merton's mystical teaching was the integration of contemplation and action. He recognized that the mystical experience cannot be separated from the practical concerns of life. True contemplation leads to an active life of love and service. Merton emphasized the idea that mystical experience should lead to social commitment and a life of justice. He saw mystical union with God as a source of inspiration for social change and peace. Interreligious dialogue. Another way in which Merton expressed his mystical insights was through interfaith dialogue. He sought the common spiritual roots of all religions and emphasized that the mystical experience transcends the boundaries of religious differences. Merton believed that mystical insights enable people to look beyond religious dogma and recognize a deeper universal truth that is present in all spiritual traditions. Thomas Merton's mystical insights are characterized by their depth, universality, and impact on daily life. His contribution to mysticism and contemplation has inspired many people to seek a deeper spiritual path that includes unity, love, and active social engagement. Mysticism in the 20th century, Thomas Merton, and 3. Desert experiences. Thomas Merton wrote about desert experiences, and this theme runs through several of his works. The term desert refers not only to physical deserts, but also to metaphorical and spiritual deserts where people face silence, emptiness, and loneliness. Here are some aspects of what Merton wrote about desert experiences. The desert as a place of silence. Merton emphasized the importance of silence as a central aspect of the desert experience. In the desert, whether physical or spiritual, there is often a stillness that silences the noise of the world. This silence becomes a space for inner reflection and contemplation. The desert becomes a place where the usual noise of life is silenced, and the soul has the opportunity to concentrate on the essentials and experience the presence of God, emptiness, and exposure. The desert also often symbolizes emptiness and exposure. Merton described the desert as a place where external distractions and certainties are reduced. It is a space where the soul becomes aware of its vulnerability and its fundamental dependence on God. by stripping away external identities and certainties, the desert experience can lead to a deeper realization of one's own weaknesses, needs, and ultimately the need for God. Loneliness and encounter. The desert experience often involves loneliness, both physical and spiritual. Merton wrote about the need to understand solitude as a space of encounter with God. In the seeming emptiness of solitude, a deeper communion with the divine can emerge. The solitude of the desert opens up the possibility of encountering oneself and God in a more intimate way, without the distractions and masks of daily life. Transformation and purification. Merton described the desert as a place of transformation and purification. In the silence and emptiness of the desert, a spiritual cleansing can take place in which the heart is freed from worldly attachments and illusions. The desert experience can lead the seeker to free himself from all superfluous things and find a deeper path of devotion to God. The desert as a place of encounter with God. A central message of Merton's writings on desert experiences is the idea that the desert becomes a place where the soul can encounter God. Through the silence, emptiness, and solitude, a deeper connection to the divine presence can develop. The desert becomes a space of prayer and contemplation, where the soul becomes receptive to God's guidance and experiences a deep spiritual communion. Challenges and fruits. Merton emphasized that the desert experience is not without challenges. The outer emptiness and inner struggles can be demanding. Nevertheless, he sees these challenges as a path to spiritual maturity and fruitfulness. The desert holds the possibility of cultivating one's spiritual landscape, producing fruits of love, kindness, and mercy, and gaining a deeper understanding of life. Overall, Merton describes the desert experiences as a path of inner transformation, where the outer and inner deserts become places of spiritual renewal and encounter with God. It is a journey of silence, emptiness, and solitude that paves the way for a deeper mystical experience of the divine. Mysticism in the 20th century. Thomas Merton's 4 own desert experiences narrative style on Merton. There are many events in Thomas Merton's life that can be interpreted as desert experiences, but one of the most notable examples is his time in the Gethsemani convent, especially during his contemplation in the hermitage. Here is an exemplary story: the solitude of the hermitage. Thomas Merton spent a considerable part of his monastic life in the hermitage of Gethsemani convent, a small hut on the convent grounds. This hermitage became a symbolic place of desert experience for Merton. In the hermitage, Merton lived in silence and solitude. The hut was simply furnished, and Merton spent hours in prayer and contemplation. The physical solitude in the desert of the hermitage mirrored the spiritual solitude he sought in order to encounter God on a deeper level, the emptiness and exposure. During his time at the hermitage, Merton confronted the emptiness and exposure of his own self. He had only the bare necessities of material things, and the simple environment of the hermitage reflected the denudation of external distractions. In this emptiness and exposure, Merton experienced a deep longing for God. It was a time of spiritual unfolding in which he clearly saw his own limitations and needs. This experience led to a deep inner transformation, the search for unity. The hermitage became a space for Merton to search for unity with God. In the hours of silence, he recognized the need to overcome the separation between the self and God. His mystical experiences led to moments of deep contemplation in which he felt the presence of God in a more intense way. Merton described these experiences as moments of union in which the soul connected with the divine source. The search for union in the hermitage was not only a spiritual practice, but also a personal journey of love and devotion, challenges and fruits. The time at the hermitage was not without its challenges. Merton faced the inner struggles and temptations often associated with a spiritual journey. Solitude could become a trial, but it was precisely these challenges that Merton saw as necessary for spiritual growth. The fruits of this desert experience manifested themselves in Merton's writings, his theological works, and his commitment to social justice. The depth of inner transformation he experienced at the Hermitage contributed to his ability to bridge the gap between mystical spirituality and the practical concerns of the world. The return to community. Merton eventually left the Hermitage and returned to the community at Gethsemani Monastery. However, this return was not to be understood as the end of his desert experience, but as the integration of the insights he had gained into daily life. He continued his contemplative practice and remained committed to interfaith dialogue and social justice. The insights he gained in the desert accompanied him and influenced his commitment to peace and understanding until his tragic death in 1968. Thomas Merton's desert experiences, especially in the Hermitage of Gethsemani, offer an inspiring example of the search for spiritual depth, the overcoming of challenges, and the integration of mystical insights into active life for a more just world. Mysticism in the 20th century. Thomas Merton's 5 Trappist monastery. The Trappist monastery of Gethsemani, officially known as the Abbey of Gethsemani, is an important Cistercian monastery near Bardstown, Kentucky, USA. It was founded in 1848 and is part of the Trappist congregation of Cistercians of the Strict Observance, a branch of the Cistercian order. Foundation and history. Gethsemani Monastery was founded in 1848 by a group of monks who came from the French monastery of Meilleray. It was founded under the leadership of Abbot Dom Joseph Strub. The monastery grew over the years and became a center of spirituality and contemplation. Special features of the monastery. Contemplative way of life. The monks of Gethsemani lead a contemplative way of life based on the principle of ora et labora, pray and work. Their daily routine includes times of prayer, work, spiritual readings, and silence. Simple life. The Trappists strive for a simple lifestyle characterized by asceticism and renunciation. This is reflected in their clothing, diet, and way of life. Silence and prayer. A central feature of the monastery is silence. The monks practice silent prayer and spend considerable time in personal contemplation. Notoriety and influence. Thomas Merton. One of the reasons for Gethsemani's worldwide fame is the monk Thomas Merton. He joined the monastery in 1941 and later became a well-known writer, mystic and spiritual teacher. His works, such as The 7 Steps to the Sermon on the Mount and The 7 Attics, contributed to the popularity of the monastery. Literary works. The Gethsemani Monastery and its monks have published numerous literary works over the years. Books on spirituality, prayer, and contemplative living have established the monastery as a spiritual resource. Visitors and retreats. Gethsemani Monastery attracts people from all over the world who are interested in contemplation and spiritual growth. The monastery also offers retreats where visitors can experience the contemplative Trappist way of life. Significance of Gethsemani. Gethsemani Monastery has had a significant impact on modern Christian spirituality and the understanding of contemplative living. The monks emphasize the values of silence, prayer, and simplicity as a means of drawing closer to God. The publications of Thomas Merton, who lived and wrote in the monastery, have helped to make the Trappist contemplative tradition accessible to a wider audience. Merton himself became an influential spiritual author and interpreter of the mystical tradition. The ongoing practice of prayer and work at Gethsemani Monastery makes it an important place for people in search of spiritual deepening and inner peace. Gethsemani Monastery remains an outstanding center of contemplative spirituality and contributes to bringing the teachings of the Desert Fathers into modern times. Mysticism in the 20th century. Thomas Merton's 6-example story Elena. In a remote region, surrounded by endless sand dunes and the silence of the desert, lived a woman named Elena. Her story begins in a small village where the noise of the modern world was carried through the barren landscape of the desert. Elena, however, felt an inner emptiness that she could not explain, and felt the urge to encounter the silence of the desert. Elena decided to leave everything behind, and embarked on a journey into the desert in search of a deeper meaning to her life. She crossed endless sand dunes, her steps accompanied by the blazing sun. With each step, the world around her seemed to fade, and silence took over the space once filled with the hustle and bustle of her everyday life. After days of walking, Elena reached a small cave on the edge of a dune. Here she decided to stay for a while and surrender to the solitude of the desert. The cave became her refuge, a place of silence and retreat. As the days passed, Elena delved deeper into her own soul. In the silence of the desert, Elena experienced an emptiness and exposure that at first frightened her, but then welcomed her. The desert became a mirror that exposed her fears, illusions, and outer masks. Elena became aware of her true essence and found the courage to meet herself and God in her vulnerability. The search for unity with the divine became a central theme in Elena's desert experience. In the night hours, she sat in the cave and stretched out her hands into the clear starry sky. In the darkness, she experienced the presence of God in a way that went beyond words. It was a union that erased the separation between heaven and earth, between the self and the divine. The solitude of the desert became a source of renewal for Elena. In her deepest solitude, she found a profound communion with the invisible. The desert became a place of birth, of love and compassion, not only for herself, but for all of creation. The challenges Elena faced in the desert were real. The heat of the day and the cold of the night tested her endurance, but it was in these trials that she discovered her own inner strength. The desert became a teacher, showing her that the greatest fruits often grow from the harshest conditions. Finally, after weeks of desert experience, Elena returned to the world, but she was not the same. The emptiness in her heart had given way to a feeling of fullness. She had recognized silence as a source of strength, experienced solitude as a path to inner communion with God, and understood emptiness as a space for new creation. Elena became a source of inspiration for those who were searching for a deeper meaning. Her words carried the wisdom of the desert, and her actions showed that true change often lies in the silence and exposure of one's own desert experience. In remembering her time in the desert, Elena found not only peace, but also the freedom born from connecting with the infinite expanse of silence.